Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're doing fantastic. We are on a new essay of Alexander Hamilton titled The Same Subject Continued, which remember 15 was the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union. So he's going to continue those ideas forward. Let's dig into it. Hamilton is a fantastic writer. The tendency of the principle of legislation for states or communities in their political capacities, as it has been exemplified by the experiment we have made of it, is equally attested by the events which have befallen all other governments of the confederate kind of which we have any account, in exact proportion to its prevalence in those systems. The confirmations of this fact will be worthy of a distinct and particular examination. I shall content myself with barely observing here that of all the confederacies of antiquity which history has handed down to us, the Lycian, the Aegean leagues, as far as there remain vestiges of them, notice how he says remain vestiges, so saying, well, they pretty fragmented, right? Appear to have been most free from the fetters of that mistaken principle, and were accordingly those which have best deserved and have most liberally received the applauding suffrages of political writers. Applauding suffrages. These exceptional principles may as truly as emphatically be styled parent of anarchy. Oh, so he's contending confederacies are parents to anarchy. Confederacies turn into tribal things, which turn into factions, or tribal and factions, you can almost call it synonymous, right? Except depending on the context and time period and where it's being used. But the fragmentation, the breaking off into smaller and smaller groups, essentially, right? Leading into a disunion, which is a form of chaos, which anarchy comes from sort of chaos because there isn't a centralized control, right? Which would be a union. It has been seen that delinquencies in the members of the union are a natural and necessary offspring, and that whenever they happen, the only constitutional remedy is force. So, a constitutional remedy for anarchy is force, he's contending, and the immediate effect of the use of it, civil war. Wow. It remains to inquire how far so odious an engine of government and its application to us would even be capable of answering its end. If there should not be a large army constantly at the disposal of the national government, it would either not be able to employ force at all, or when this could be done, it would amount to war between different parts of the Confederacy concerning the infractions of a league in which the strongest combination would most likely prevail. Okay, let's break this down for a second. War between different parts. Remember, a confederacy could be the states, remember, at this time. However, you could look at that today. There's been rivalries of music, which is not the same thing, I get it, but East Coast versus West Coast. However, today, the red states and blue states, it's quite contentious. I mean, it's quite hot. It's good, especially California is really trying to be the spearhead of that, really just fragmenting the nation. It's really crazy. Infractions of a league. So a league, we can consider that as a activist movement. Today, that would be a league in which the strongest combination will most likely prevail. So the strongest combination, now we could look at strong and apply that to today as in the strongest economically, the strongest as in has the most hold over institutions. So, well, the strongest who has censorship in the tech world would prevail to a certain degree if they were able to stop other apps from rising up and giving a voice to the ones who've been silenced, right? Also, strongest as in terms of economic power, but also, another could argue, healthiness of citizens and the intelligence of their citizens and the happiness thereof, because they'll be more content and less prone to anarchy, less prone to hear the leagues sowing dispute among the peaceful, right? Quite interesting when we really examine that and bring it out to our current predicaments. Whether it consisted of those who supported or of those who resisted the general authority. It could rarely happen that the delinquency to be redressed would be confined to a single member, and if there were more than one who had neglected their duty, similarity of situation would induce them to unite for common defense. Similarity of situation making people unite to defend their common interests. Quite true. Independent of this motive of sympathy, if a large and influential state should happen to be the aggressing member, it would commonly have weight enough with its neighbors to win over some of them as associates to its cause. Specious arguments of danger to the general liberty could easily be contrived. Suspicious arguments of danger to the general liberty could be contrived. So many could say, oh, we have to do this in the name of safety and security. Plausible excuses for the deficiency of the party could without difficulty be invented to alarm the apprehensions, inflame the passions, and conciliate the goodwill even of those states which were not chargeable. So, invented to alarm apprehensions. So, made up fake news to frighten the people of their biggest fears and then make them motivated to anger. Sounds a lot like what CNN does. Were not chargeable with any violations of omission of duty. This would be the more likely to take place as the delinquencies of the larger members might be expected sometimes to produce from an ambitious premeditation in their rulers. Ambitious premeditations in leaders, with a view to getting rid of external control upon their designs of personal aggrandizement. Getting rid of external control. Now, anarchy, there's no external control. Regulation is a form of control, so let's see what he means. The better to effect which is presumably they would tamper beforehand with leading individuals in the adjacent states, so they would tamper with those who were in neighboring states to try to pick them over to the cause. If associates could not be found at home, recourse would be had to the aid of foreign powers. Okay, so if they can't find people in the homeland who like it, they'll see the aid of other nations, who would seldom be disinclined to encouraging the dissensions of a confederacy. So he's contending that foreign powers, rarely will they ever deny the opportunity to make confederacies even more fragmented from the firm union of which they had so much to fear. Yeah, one fist of force is more scary than a finger poking you, right? When the sword is once drawn, the passion of men observe no bounds of moderation. Well, it activates that blood, you know what I mean? The suggestion of wounded pride, the instigation of irritated resentment. Wounded pride. That's another one. When you have a wounded pride, instigations of irritated resentment. Notice that for a second though, right? Instigation, so that to light it, and then irritated, and then resentment. Would be apt to carry the states against which the arms of the Union were exerted to any extremes necessary to avenge the affront or to avoid the disgrace of submission. Avoiding disgraces of submission. The first war of this kind would probably terminate in a dissolution of the Union. So a war that sought to make people more resentful would dissolve the Union, he's contending. A lot of people worry about that today. This may be considered as the violent death of the Confederacy. Well, all regimes usually end in violence, don't they? It is more natural death is what we now seem to be on the point of experiencing. If the federal system be not speedily renovated in a more substantial form, it is not probable, considering the genius of this country, that the complying states would often be inclined to support the authority of the Union by engaging in a war against non-complying states. Engaging in a war with non-complying states, that would be quite scary. Depending on who's the aggressor and who's the one not submitting, right? They would always be more ready to pursue the milder course of putting themselves upon an equal footing with the delinquent members by an imitation of their example. Imitation of their example, okay. And the guilt of all would thus become the security of all. Ooh, that's a line right there. The guilt of all becomes the security of all. Whew. That's quite scary when you think of collective guilt. It's not white language that I would want to hear.